notes ready. I'm ready.
Julio. Alright, that should be us live now. Hopefully. Yep. So today we're basically Chronic over here. He's a good guy. But we have apparently a disagreement over the proper strategy, I suppose. I'll let you say
Well,
your piece on that.
yes. Yes, here I'm today I am here to convince everyone to take the libertarian black pill, and that is to say, my position for this debate is that, practically speaking, a libertarian society will never come about. I base this on the fact that, regardless of the ethical facts of the matter, people actually want other people to be forced to do things their way. Normal people, I mean. Either because it satisfies them in the immediate sense to know that other people are being coerced to do things their way. For example, laws mandating the wearing of masks. People are like, yes, I want other people to be forced to wear masks. It satisfies me to know that this is happening. Or that, in the more complex sense, that like special interests like businesses, it is in their interest that they have other competitors be suppressed, that it so that they can, have a better time on the market or the mixed market supposedly. And so yeah, there's some individual self-interest there in having the state suppress others. Because normal people don't actually care about the non-aggression principle, and normal people determine the predominant narratives of society based on what they care about or at least indifferent to. This poses a major and, in my opinion, insurmountable barrier to the formation of a stateless society. The fact is, most people like knowing that other people will get hurt for doing things that they don't like, as long as they don't have to participate or observe the hurting. And furthermore, are predisposed to accept orders from authority figures, making the formation of a state all but certain. This is not me saying that anarchism is bad because it would lead to a state. Anarchism is good. It's just saying that we'll never have anarchism because no one actually wants it.
Sure.
Except for, like us two and, our minority of friends.
So, I think based on what you're saying there, I think this fundamentally comes down to two different theories of the philosophy of history. So, like, there are a bunch of different theories. Like, there's like the Marxist one, where basically the philosophy of history in general is asking what are the fundamental causes which make men act in certain ways, like make them choose certain things, and like what is causing the direction of history, what is causing these events to happen. So the Marxist one would be the economic theory of history, like it's all these economic factors outside of ideology or anything else which cause it all. There's Carlyle. He had the great man theory, where it's a couple of individuals throughout history have like disproportionate power in shaping how things go. And like what I think what we're coming down to is, I think you have the most reasonable of the incorrect theories, which is, it sounds like the psychological theory of history, where it is basically the way you explain people's behaviors throughout history is based on like the predominant psychology of the day. So if you have a bunch of people who have a need of dependence, they have like these psychological urges to depend on other men, be told what to do, then you're going to have, and you've got a bunch of like power lusters as well. Then you get like the Nazis, where you have power lusters as leaders and dependents as followers. I think the problem with this is, and I'm taking up the counter stance of the philosophical theory of history, where it is the philosophy of the day is what is actually causing the outcomes of history, like what is causing history to play out the way it does. And basically the reason why I say like the psychological theory of history is the most reasonable of the incorrect philosophies, because on its philosophies of history, is because on its face it's correct. Like, it is correct that you need to have dependents, people who want to depend on the group and depend on powerful people, and you need to have power lusters for things like Nazi Germany to happen. That is correct. But these are not irreducible primaries, these psychological stances in people. They are actually, basically, they're derived from emotions, and emotions are derived from people's ideas. The reason why I say this and why the objectivists say this is because, like, the only thing which differs an emotion, on the one hand, from sensations on the other, is that sensations are caused by purely physical interaction with the outside world. You have some physical stimulus,
Yeah.
and then you have some sensation of that stimulus. So If you have
Yeah,
like,
you have that in Stoicism as well, where you have like your external impressions, like you see something, and then your way you react to it is an internal thing. Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Yeah,
So like basically, if you were to take a libertarian and a Marxist, and you were to prick each of them with a needle on the arm, they would both have the exact same sensation from that, because it doesn't matter what they believe about needles pricking people, they're going to have the same sensation. But if you took an asceticist, somebody who hates living on Earth, and you subjected them to some pain, they're going to like that they're undergoing this suffering. They're going to seek that suffering out. They're going to evaluate it as being a good thing because of their ideas, because of their philosophy. Whereas if you took somebody who is like an Aristotelian or something, who thinks that you should be living for now, you should be living on Earth for your own happiness, they're going to hate that they're undergoing the suffering, right? So this is the emotion is different between these two people, and sort of bringing this back around because I've gone on a bit of a rant here.
you're
Basically,
establishing your priors here. Yeah,
yeah. So the psychological theory of history is that it is these ideas that men have, these desires, these urges that men have, which are causing everything. But these desires that men have, they are prior caused by whatever philosophy they have. So it's really what's important is the philosophy, and like the masses are not the ones who promulgate or come up with philosophies. They have to necessarily follow the philosophies which are coming from the intellectuals. And that's why I say we have to focus on intellectuals rather than taking this sort of black pill view that you'd have to change the minds of masses.
that's interesting because what I would say is most people. Well, I think you would agree with this. Is that most people don't really think about philosophy, right? Most people just kind of behave in a way that they intuit, right? And they might intuit part of this from the dominant ideas in the culture, the philosophy that the elites promulgate. However, I also think that I don't think one of these is prior to the other. I think they're simultaneous, right? You have the ideas in your culture, and then you also have the internal feelings of a person, and these, neither one predates the other. They exist in parallel, and they kind of uh, come together to form what how the person behaves, right? It's sort of, what is it? How there's, studies show that 50% of a person's behavior can be predicted by their genetics, and the other 50% can be predicted by their environment, something like that. And where am I going with this? So because of this, I think that there's actually normal people have predispositions that exist regardless of the philosophical environment that they exist in. You know, the idea that people want to listen to authority figures, I think that's a natural human predisposition that occurs prior to the existence of like a state or like any actual authority figures, because I reckon it's an evolutionary thing where it's beneficial to your survival in a hunter-gatherer type situation to listen to paternal authority figures, family, that sort of thing, to survey yourself to that kind of structure. Whether or not that's adapted to a modern division of labor is questionable, but the fact is that's kind of how humans behave. And yes, I think these predispositions which limit normal people from being able to change their ideas to, well, where I'm going with this is that they can't really make their way to a libertarian way of thinking, and therefore you can't have a libertarian society because these normal people are just incapable of thinking that way.
Well, I would disagree there that it could be the case that these psychological desires are derived from your nature, because that is an alternative, you might say. Well, either you could have these two alternatives. Maybe people's emotions, people's desires are derived from whatever thoughts they have, or maybe it is that it's derived from some inherent aspect of their nature, like they've evolved a certain way, so they have to have these certain desires. The problem with that view is that individuals definitely do. Like, we both have a desire for freedom. So do we have a different nature? And secondly, the psychology of any given age, like the mass psychology on a scale, which is relevant in studying history, that also changes. Like, there's apparently a psychology of freedom among the early Americans, right? And then there's a psychology of massive dependence among, like, the communist Russians. So, like, how could it change
Yeah.
between individuals and between groups if it's based upon the nature of man as such?
Well, when we're talking about the nature of man here, we're not talking about like the fundamental fundamentals of action, right? Where which this is something that doesn't change between like all men. Like all men act, all men seek ends using means, right? But when we're talking about psychology, this is something that does vary between individuals and between groups, and this is something that is not as fundamental as like human action. This is something you can, and the fact that they have a different nature, like some other people are like predisposed to different psychological conditions. This is something we can observe, right? There are people who are predisposed to depression or anxiety disorders, this sort of thing, based on the way their brain operates because of their genetics, right? They have a different way of their brain works differently, right? So what I suppose is that most normal people have a brain which is predisposed to accept authority figures and not think too hard about things and to what I'm looking for. Oh yeah. The other part of this is that most normal people are very deeply tribal, even if they won't really admit it. It's that they like to know that the other team is getting hurt and that their team is winning. Um, whether or not that's an aggressive thing. Like it could be like two companies, right? And your company is like beating the other company in the free market, right? And you're feeling like you're winning, but that's the same emotional high they would get from like being in an army, and they know that the other army is getting blown up. Like, yeah, we're winning. Huzzah.
I'd say, like, if it is based upon, like, different men have different brain structures, then you shouldn't expect these massive trends. Like, in the early medieval age, like, everybody was hating Earth. They were having this massive psychology of dependence. But then when Aquinas comes along and reintroduces Aristotle, and you get into post-scholastic medieval times, then suddenly, like, everybody is, like, there's a lot more this or worldliness, there's a lot more rationality. And, like, there are people are loving living in this earth, and that's how you eventually get to the United States. But if it was just individual differences, like, this person is predisposed to, like, cancer or whatever, that shouldn't be coming in these massive trends. Like, you don't have, like, an era where suddenly everybody was predisposed to cancer based on their genetics, then followed by an era where there isn't so much of that,
Yeah, that's a result of it being like partially based on predispositions and partially environmental factors, right? And so I would say that when you're talking about philosophy and the ideas in the environment, the stuff that's created by your philosophical elites, that affects the same way as environmental factors, right? So like maybe you're predisposed to cancer, but you don't go out in the sun all that often. Like maybe you're predisposed to melanoma, skin cancer, right? But you don't go out in the sun and you wear sunscreen, so you're protected from the sun, and you don't actually end up with skin cancer, even though you're predisposed to it. But even then, if most people in the society are predisposed to skin cancer, uh, despite the protective measures, you're still going to have more rates of skin cancer, right? So what I'm saying is that normal people in general are predisposed to accept authority, and you can have libertarian ideas which become somewhat popular, but that still doesn't get you to a libertarian society. Like the United States, early United States was very good in like very like a great progression towards a stateless society, but there was all these interests that did it lead to the formation of a state anyway, because well, you have people who have interest in the state because it benefits them like economically or materially. Like, if I have the state, I can use this to extract wealth from other people and make myself richer, or pursue my own goals regarding prohibiting people from consuming beverages I don't like, or practicing religions I don't like, or all sorts of other things you would know. And then you have midwits or normal people who want the state because they want something that will tell them what to do and tell them that the other team is losing.
I would say, like, the downfall of the US from what was essentially pretty close to anarchy into like the massive statism we have now, that is perfectly explainable on the philosophical view, because you have these massive corruptions in the 20th century. Like, the US was founded upon Enlightenment principles, but then those Enlightenment principles were destroyed and torn apart by, like, the skeptics and the Kantians and all these different people. And then they ended up importing all these ideas over to the US. And that's how you see all this corruption following into the US and destroying the US. And, like, the US isn't even the only example. Like, I have a video on Iceland, which I actually reviewed recently, because there was a conversation about it or something somewhere. And basically, like, the thesis of that video is that, well, we had this essentially anarchist society, with tiny, tiny little status elements. And it was surviving for centuries, longer than the US has survived, in fact. And then the church comes along and introduces a new philosophy, introduces a new system of thoughts, a more statist system of thoughts. And then they introduce the tithe because of that, because of this new philosophy which comes in. And that's what caused the eventual downfall of medieval Iceland. So, like, it's the downfalls of these anarchist societies is because of new thoughts being introduced. It's not because, like, the nature of men change, or like the biological makeup of men change. It's because of the thoughts which are brought in.
Yeah, I have a question. So what in the philosophical theory of history, what factors determine which philosophies become popular or predominant? Because you're mentioning, like, the church brings in a philosophy to Iceland, and then Iceland becomes more statist, or the United States. I think that's a better example, because the United States would have exposure to more different philosophies over time, and obviously not all philosophies become predominant, right? Not all thoughts end up being culture defining, right? You have like pre-Marxian socialists didn't get very popular. Like, they would make like a compound or something. They would think about stuff. They would publish, but they wouldn't get widespread support or anything. Whereas Marxian socialism, Marx writes, and then his ideas get adopted, and then they spread, and you get Marxist revolutions in Russia, but you don't get Marxist revolutions in, like, Western Europe. And part of the reason that is, in Western Europe, the population wasn't as predisposed to Marxian ideas. Part of that because of the material conditions, right? So, in the peasants in Russia were far easier to convince of Marxian ideas, or to follow, like, a Marxist doctrine, because of the utter poverty and, like, terrible situation they were in. And so they were willing to accept, like, oh yeah, if you just kill the nobility and the rich people and take their stuff, things will get better. And it's like, oh yeah, I can see that happening. If I'm, like, dirt poor, and all of my family is also dirt poor for the last, like, 10 generations, and things are only getting worse. Like, yeah, maybe I will kill the rich people, because that'll make things, and especially because this intelligent man who's come to my village, he's telling me that if we kill the rich people, things will get better. So clearly I should. Whereas if you're in, like, Western Europe at this time, where things are industrializing, you're realizing, I don't think I really want to kill this guy. He's kind of industrializing my town. Things are getting better. Everyone's getting richer. Everyone's getting, more products. I think that's a bad idea. And so they're not predisposed to that sort of idea, because of the conditions that are in their environment. Even though they're predisposed to statism, right? Because the desire for authority, they still, respect the British Empire there. They're not predisposed to, like, Marxian version of that philosophy, right? So I'm curious how you would account for, like, which philosophies become prominent, like, and how that happens. Is it based just on the philosophers, how they debate, or what's up?
Yeah, so it's basically, like, based on, like, the actual, like, content of what individual philosophies come up, and, like, how successful individual philosophers are at promulgating these things. Because, it could have been the case that, like, somebody in some random rural medieval village, like, a century before Aquinas was born, came up with, like, all of objectivism and anarcho-capitalism and all that. Maybe that happened, probably not, because the history, like, not just spiral, but, just to take, like, the reductio case, maybe they came up with, like, they were like a 20 Aristotles in terms of their understanding of the world, but then they were just immediately killed for apostasy, or they were like, they just didn't have enough money or time because they were like some peasant to write down all these ideas or whatever, or maybe they just didn't survive or whatever. So like there are a lot of different factors which play into how certain philosophies win out. Like, you know, there are basically like, I can't go over like everything, of course, because I would require an entire like history of philosophy. But like basically you have like Plato and Aristotle are the first two relevant philosophers in this. So like Aristotle had a very this worldly philosophy, Plato had a very otherworldly philosophy. Basically the reason why Plato won out there is because really what men want out of a philosophy is philosophy is basically like, you know, what is there, how do we know, and so what, right? It's the so what which the average man cares about. It's the ethics. And Plato had a very like thorough and well worked out ethics. There's like, here's how it all derives from my metaphysics. Like his ethics was like a very large focus of his philosophy, whereas Aristotle didn't really spend that much time on his ethics. Like it was just kind of like, oh, just, you know, just look at what the good Spartan does. And, yeah, just look at what the good Spartan does, and then we can, you know, copy them, which is like not really like gripping men's hearts with the same passion that Plato had, because Aristotle was more concerned with like metaphysics and epistemology type stuff. But that's basically like how Plato won out and gave us Christianity. And then, you know, we have years of medievals where they're just having constant suffering and all this. And then Aristotle was thankfully preserved by the Muslims and was brought back over to Europe through the scholastics. And Aquinas managed to reintroduce Aristotle. And that's how we end up leading to a few centuries of thought later, thinking upon this Aristotelian sense of where it's like, no, this world is real, this world is good, you should live for this world. Eventually you get to the Enlightenment, and that's how we have like things like you know, the United States coming up from that and stuff like that. So that's how Aquinas came back in. But then the Enlightenment philosophers, they made some errors in their thinking, which, like, you know, the skeptics just loved to point out these errors. And they were doing that left, right, and center. They were pointing out all these different errors. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense. This part doesn't make sense. And then you have like these massive destroyers of philosophy coming out for that, where they're just completely tearing down everything, which the Aristotelians managed to.
Hegel. Yeah, Hegel moment.
Yeah, Hegel comes in, destroys it all. So basically, they were able to exploit some mistakes made before, and then they were once again able to destroy man. And this is why it's so great that Ayn Rand came around after the Industrial Revolution, and was like, no, let's bring it back. This is why Ayn Rand is one of the most important philosophers ever.
Go back. I want to be Aristotle.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. And I feel like there's an acknowledgement that the what was I going to say? There was an acknowledgement that the sort of the predisposition of the population has some effect on what philosophies they're convinced by. Like it's the what was it you said? It was the third thing in what philosophy tells you about, like the who cares part.
Yeah. What do we know? What is there? How do we know? And so what?
Yeah. So what? The so what part, right? So there's like the, you know, people are swayed by the so what, or I think it's I think a relevant quote that came up to my mind is like the Nietzsche quote. He who has a why can endure any how, right? Or is that Nietzsche or Jung? I can't remember. No one cares. The point is, the philosophy someone's convinced by might have less to do just with what the philosophy is, or how convincing the speaker is, and more with what they're willing to accept. And I feel like that being a significantly relevant factor is the blocking point on libertarianism, because people just really don't seem to like the idea that like other people will get to do things that they want without being interfered. Like I draw this on partly on personal experience with talking with other people outside, like, you know, in the real world. I talk to normal people. This is partly anecdotal, right? When I talk to them and I mention events, right, or how other people behave, usually that someone's going to say they shouldn't be allowed to do that, or some other variation of this. And it just strikes me as a very deeply authoritarian mindset. And it happens like cross-culturally. Different heritages of people. Like I speak to some people who are like Italian heritage, some people who are like Middle Eastern, like Lebanese. You know, I live in Australia. We have a very multicultural environment here, so I get some like a slice of every different background here, and most people, like when they hear about other people doing things they don't like, at least disapproving, and often say that there should be something done to stop these people, usually with force and perhaps even the state, right? And that's part of what strikes me here. And then that's like my anecdotal experience. And then I look at historical experience where you have, well, states, right? You have states for almost all of history, and it strikes me that this is a result of people being predisposed to want the state to do things to other people that they wouldn't be able to do on their own, or they wouldn't be able to do in a libertarian society, because they really want other people to be coerced.
So I would say like the reason why we have this cross-cultural, dependence on the state and saying, no, the state should come in and be like a parent for everybody, isn't because of a predisposition to have a psychology of statism. It's because there is no rational culture. Every culture on Earth right now is irrational because of these massive destructions for the post-Enlightenment, which is why it's... but if you had some rational society, some rational individualist freedom society, which could only come about because of being pushed by intellectuals, then you wouldn't have this, it wouldn't be this immediate reaction to say, well, this thing I don't like should be stopped, we should ban it, because they would be acting on proper rational premises. And it is true, you said there, that it is the midwit, the average everyman doesn't really care about anything but the so what. But like the intellectuals do care about the what is there and how do we know. They do care about that, and then they're the ones who are going to be like, who the ruffians are going to be looking to for the so what. Like, if you infect all these intellectuals with a freedom philosophy, with a rational philosophy, they have the metaphysics, they have the epistemology down to a T, then they have to necessarily come to a rational ethics. Then they're going to be saying, then when people are looking to them, oh, what philosophy should we follow, Mr. Professor? Well, you should follow rational philosophy. You should follow, selfishness rather than altruism. You should do these things. You should live for Earth. You should live for yourself. You shouldn't be destroying your life. You shouldn't be destroying the lives of others. We should have freedom. And that's how you're going to get the so what promulgated throughout over a few generations into the masses, and they just won't, because they can't think for themselves, right?
It's interesting. I mean, I think there might be a way to conceptualize this, that there's like a market for ideas, right? Obviously, people want ideas to some extent, even especially if they can't come up with them on their own, right? They kind of, there's a level of, well, I want to know something to think what I should think about this, and so there are also producers of ideas like the church, your professors, your philosophers, etc. And the thing is, I think the demand for an idea which tells you can't force other people to do things your way is much lower than an idea which tells you, yes, you can hurt other people, and we're going to set up this big organization which takes from everyone, including people you don't like, but also from you. But it's okay, because we're going to do what you want, or so we say. And we will hurt the people you don't like. We will do the things you do like. Supposedly, that's what we say, and I think that's a much more convincing, not convincing, because it's not necessarily like rationally convincing. It's more emotionally satisfactory idea than actually we're just going to have a society where we don't hurt each other, we play nice, we respect each other's rights. We're good people. That's much more boring than, yes, you do get to hurt other people, or you get to have, actually, the thing is, most people don't like individually hurting other people because, well, it's icky, right? It's disgusting. You have to deal with blood. You have to clean up the body. It's not very nice. Most people like having the idea that the people they don't like will get hurt, rather than I have to hurt them myself, right? So that's why people are predisposed to statism rather than just like barbaric violence. It's like, well, we can have this organization which does things in a very orderly, organized manner to hurt other people, hurt the people I don't like, and protect my interests over other people's interests.
Well, I'd say I think we still have this like fundamental point that these emotions that people have, like, they aren't the primary here. The primary is the thoughts which cause those emotions. Those emotions are either rational or irrational. Like, the way you feel about a certain thing isn't the primary. It's your ideas about that thing which cause you to feel in a certain way about it. So the Marxist, when he sees a factory owner getting robbed, he feels good about it because his ideas tell him that it's good when this happens, that it's just when this happens. Whereas the libertarian would be appalled because his ideas are telling him that this is an evil. It's a bad thing, right? It's bad for life. Like, it's bad for his survival. That it should be opposed, right? So it's the ideas which are primary, and it's not just any old ideas. Like, because we're not talking about random individuals within any given society. They aren't the ones shaping history. It has to be an idea so fundamental that it is able to pervade, not just like in this one specific, what is like the best way to woodwork. Like, that only clearly only applies to woodworkers. But it has to be more fundamental than that. It's these fundamental ideas which pervade any intellectual pursuit you might consider. They pervade all of society. Those ideas are what philosophy is made up of, right? So it is fundamentally the philosophy which determines and pervades all of culture, all of society, and then determines how men in society act. And philosophy is only really fundamentally promulgated and elucidated, explicated by intellectuals. It's not done by the masses who don't really care about it.
Okay, that's interesting. So I think what I said earlier was that I think ideas and emotions are simultaneous, right? Neither one is primary to the other one. And I would say this, so you can partially observe this in very young children or babies who don't really have ideas at any point, and they're still satisfied by things, right? They still see things that satisfy them. And you can see this, you can call this basically their emergence of like basic fundamental ideas in their mind, like hurting bad or being hurt bad. I don't like being hurt, right? And that's kind of like then they're coming up with things on their own, or seeing that other people get hurt, or feeling sensations that they dislike, and then drawing conclusions from that, right? But they're drawing conclusions from their sensations and emotions there, which cause them to get ideas. But the other thing is, people do have ideas which cause them to feel certain ways about things. Like, this isn't like in Stoicism, right? You can see like the fundamental idea of Stoicism is that you have control over how you respond to your impressions based on the ideas you have in your head. What you think about things determines how you feel about them, right? So like if you think I must not be late to this meeting, and then you see the train is late, you're going to be upset. But if you think I could be late to this meeting, I'd be fine with that. And you see the train is late, you're going to be fine, right? But that's a result of the idea you have in your head. And if you select Stoicism to be an idea you believe in, that's probably because you might have a predisposition to just like wanting to be emotionally stable, being satisfied by being emotionally stable. Some people, it might not seem it, but they are very satisfied by being angry all the time. And these people are not, predisposed to select Stoicism as an idea that they adopt, right? These people are like, no, I do want to be angry at the train. I like having tantrums at the train platform or on the internet. And so I think because ideas and emotions are simultaneous, the ideas you have influence the emotions you have, and then the emotions you have influence the ideas you want to have. There's a bit more of a complex interplay here of what is going to end up being the predominant philosophy in a society.
Well, I'd say for the instance of like a baby, I would agree that they don't have like ideas or philosophy yet. But when if you punch a baby and then they start crying, I don't think they have an emotion that, oh, it's bad to get punched. I don't think they have that yet. Basically, they just have the sensation of pain, and they react to the sensation of pain by crying out for help. Right? I don't think it's based on an emotion yet, because emotions they essentially they occur on the conceptual rather than the perceptual level. It's an emotion is something like this concept, this abstract idea is either good or bad. I evaluate this idea in some certain way. It's not this perceptual loop of feel pain, cry out because I'm a baby. It's conceptual thing, right?
Well, you can see babies who babies who have been hurt like prior, and then you like wait like 1 year or 6 months, and then they see something that they associate with being hurt, but they haven't been hurt yet. Like they haven't, for instance, you prick them with a pin, right, and they get hurt, they get upset. That's their like reaction to a sensation, right? But then 6 months in the run, they see a pin. They haven't been pricked yet, but they see it and they remember and they associate this with being bad. So that you can see that they've generated an idea that the pin causes pain and the pin is bad, and therefore, that's an emotional response rather than just a direct reflexive response, you might call it.
Well, I think that like this sort of conditioning, I don't think that is emotional. You might be able to condition certain emotions into people, but I don't think like the baby eventually, like, it does start to learn, it does start to abstract, like, if you did keep pricking it with the pin, eventually it's going to learn, because it's a human, right? It's going to learn, oh, pin prick, I can abstract from the individual pin pricks and pain to pins cause pain when pricking you. Like, eventually they could do that, but that happens on the conceptual level, I would say. Like, unless it is just a mere conditioning. So, like, not sure what the correct way to think about conditioning is, actually. Because, I mean, could you condition an ant to do something in some particular way?
I don't think ants have such a complex neurological system that they can really experience emotions the way like primates or like mammals or like large-brained organisms can. Like, ants have so few neurons that they're basically like automatons. They're machines, right? They execute commands based on stimulus. Whereas like simians clearly have perceptions and like what we might call emotional responses to stimuli. Ants, I mean, ants, like, you might personify them, like ants can panic if you like drop a rock into the line, they will scatter. But I don't think you can say that they're really feeling panic. They're just responding in like an automatic way. Ants don't really learn anything.
Well, I would say like I'm not so sure about this, so like take this with like a grain of salt. I might change my mind about this when I think about it more, but like I would be willing, for like the purposes of this discussion, to say that maybe if you can condition a certain behavior into a thing, then that thing is able to, at least within that domain, abstract and have concepts within that domain, right? It might not be general conceptual intelligence like a human has, but at least within some particular domain, it can abstract. And then insofar as a baby is doing this, insofar as you are conditioning a baby to associate pinpricks with, pain, then they are, on the conceptual level, they are abstracting out. They have a certain idea about what a pin is and what it causes. So this is still, like, the idea comes before the emotion, right? Even if they are, like, having an emotional response to a pin rather than some physiological response to it. And that has to come from some abstraction of the idea of what a pin is, right? You have to have ideas for that.
I think we might have a slightly different idea of what an emotion is, because an emotion, in my understanding, in my mind, is sort of like it's kind of like an internal sensation, right? It's a sensation that's like secondary to like immediate perception, right? Like I see something and that's like a sensation, right? Like I detect an object in the environment with sight. And then like an emotion would be a reaction I have to that perception that's based on partly my thoughts, partly my ideas, and then partly just sort of like what my brain is like. So I have a disgust reaction when I smell like a rotting bird in some bushes. Like that doesn't have much to do with my ideas. That has more to do with my brain being like, oh, that's disgusting. And so whereas when you're talking about emotions, I have the idea that you're talking more specifically about reactions that are derived from ideas, right? Like so we should probably clarify that a bit.
Sure. So I would class a sensation are those mental phenomena, you could say, which are derivable from purely physical stimuli. So, smelling a rotting bird and you know, feeling nauseous or whatever, that would be a sensation, not an emotion that you're having. Emotions are fundamentally not based upon your physical sensations. So they must be based upon something else. And that something else is your ideas with respect to those sensations. How you think those those sensations play upon your life, like whether or not those sensations are good or bad or something else, right?
Right, right. Well, I think what's something to note was like your sensation of like the smell of a rotting bird. That's like prior to a reaction, right? So there could be someone who smells a rotting bird and they don't feel disgust by that smell, not because of their ideas, just because maybe they have a disorder right in their brain. They don't have a disgust reaction or something. And so I think like that's the sensation to me. Is like your body detects this stimulus, right? And then like whatever reaction you have to that's like automatic would be like a emotional response. Or maybe that's not just emotional response, because I also think emotional responses can be influenced by your ideas. So I think that might be like a reflexive emotional response. It's like disgust, like because human beings don't really choose to be disgusted, at least initially. Like you know, initially the disgust response is like a natural reflexive reaction, and then people can learn to be disgusted by other things because the brain is a very complex machine. Things can just get connected neurologically just by thinking. So you might develop a disgust response towards statism because of the things you learn about statism and what it's associated with. Like you see pictures of exploded people and you're like, I'm disgusted by this, and you think about the state having done this, and now you associate disgust with the state, right? So I think that there's a potential here that you have like reflexive emotional responses that are like prior to what you might have like a developed emotional response.
I think what you are classing as a reflexive emotion, I don't see that as being at all categorically different from anything else we'd call a sensation normally. Like if you have no choice in the matter, you just based upon your physiological makeup, when you sense rotting flesh, you have this certain reaction to it. That's part of the sensation of experiencing rotting flesh. Just like being pricked with a pin, you don't have any choice in the matter whether you feel pain from that. It's just part of the sensation of having a pin going into your arm, right? So these reflexive emotions, they are not categorically different from anything else normally called a sensation. So what are emotions really?
Right.
They're how you actually like choose entirely how to respond to given sensations. They are different from the sensations.
Yeah.
They're based upon your ideas.
Right. Well, I think I would say that what I call a reflexive emotional response is different from a sensation in that it's an internal like response, as opposed to the sensation is like your detection of something external, right? So it's more like if you imagine a computer program, you have like a function, right? And your function is like sense object, right? And then sense object calls reflexive response, and then your reflexive response carries on from that. And I also think you can alter your reflexive responses, but that they exist prior to ideas. They can be altered by ideas later on. You're rewriting your own code, so to speak. But I don't know if people could learn to well, yeah, I think people can learn to overcome the smell of like rotting birds. So I think that is something, you overcome your reflexive emotional response there through ideas. But initially, people have this aversion to the smell of rotting birds.
I would say like if you're overcoming an aversion to rotting bird, I don't think that's changing like anything. Like I think if there is such a thing as an innate disgust to rotting birds, that's never going to change. Like, but you could ignore it. Like, if you're a stoic monk and you feel a pinprick, you still have the same sensation of pain, but you just like it doesn't factor into what you're doing. You're just completely ignoring that sensation. So I think you could ignore your sensation of disgust from a rotting bird, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's innate. I think is it's prior. It's like you have it initially, and then it can change later, right?
But where did it come
based on,
from
like,
then?
ideas or experiences. Where does it come from? I think it comes from your, like, evolutionary biology, right? Like, creatures have sensations and prior emotions because they are a evolutionary useful tool, right? It's useful to be disgusted by rotting flesh because rotting flesh has diseases, and the disgust response causes you to avoid it, right? And so you don't catch the disease. Now, the fact that you can overcome it suggests that your body understands that it's important for your brain. Your brain doesn't understand. You've evolved this ability to overcome things because it's useful to be adaptive to your environment, and overcome some of these default responses with special like responses that are more apt for survival. For instance, if you're in an environment where rotting creatures don't carry diseases and being able to overcome that is good, then yeah,
I think
you can.
I think a good example of this is actually like, there's this show in the UK called QI where they get this bunch of like, it's like a quiz show and they have a bunch of these crazy facts on there. And basically, one of the episodes, I remember this, they said that the smell of Parmesan cheese is the exact same as the smell of vomit, right? And if you take like this chemical, you put in 2 jars, one labeled Parmesan cheese, one labeled vomit. People will go and smell one and go, ooh, that's Parmesan cheese, that's quite nice. They'll smell the other and go, oh, awful, vomit. I think this is the same exact sensation going on, but the difference there is because of the ideas relating to what Parmesan cheese is and what vomit is. It's about the idea that I have an idea in my head that Parmesan cheese is something which is good. It's good for me, it's good for my life. Whereas vomit is bad, it's very negative. So I think this is still fundamentally the ideas at play here in these responses to these stimuli.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like your ideas do have an effect on how you think about things. It's also kind of funny because I've always found Parmesan cheese to be quite revolting. So that's actually quite explanatory. But yeah. So I think again, this comes back to my idea that they're simultaneous, right? Like you have emotions initially, and then you have ideas which influence how your emotions, how you react to things as well. Whereas it's not one is prior to the other necessarily. It's that they exist in simultaneously is the what I keep coming back to because it's it's descriptive of what I think here. Like you have an initial response that you can have, and then your initial response you could have gets altered by the ideas you have in your life. So you have a different initial response next time, or based on what you think about the situation. As such.
I think this idea of like initially having emotions, well, let's break down what that would mean. It would mean that you have certain emotions based purely upon physical stimuli, but I just don't see if it is some sensation in the brain, if it is some sort of mental phenomenon which is born completely out of physical stimuli, like not out of the thoughts you're having, related to that stimuli, then it's not categorically different from just any other sensation, anything else we would call a sensation. And like perhaps you might feel like a stimuli and an emotion are the same. So like, you might have like a stimuli of disgust, and you might end up feeling that in the same way as an emotion of disgust, right? Maybe that's the problem here. But fundamentally, if it's derived from the ideas you have about a stimulus, then it's an emotion. If it's merely coming out of like a pure physical stimulus is causing this in your brain and you have no choice in the matter, then it's a stimulus.
Well, I don't know if they were necessarily born purely out of physical stimuli. I think they're born out of like I think humans have like initial preset conditions of like I think we can say that babies have very simple cognition, right? They don't have like complex abstract ideas in any respect, but they do have like some. Let's maybe elevate this a bit, like to toddlers, because babies really don't think, but like toddlers have some level of cognition and they think about things to some extent. I think that there's an initial like initial conditions that a human like behaves, right? Because if they didn't have any kind of initial responses to anything, then babies would be totally inert, right? They wouldn't respond to sensations. Um, so, but they don't really have thoughts initially either. They have just responses. So I think this might be a consequence that I separate like sensations as things you detect, and then emotions as things you experience internally, and then ideas are like things you think about. Whereas I think in your definition, you combine sensation to be like emotions and detection. That might be
No, I would say a sensation is something which is automatically, you know, it's automatic based upon some physical stimulus. You have no choice in whether you feel that thing. But emotion is chosen. It's based upon your thoughts. I think like what we come to with this idea of like, a baby or a toddler has some level of thought, but it's not on the same level. Basically, this is like you go through different stages in your development of your mind. So like when you're just on the pure perceptual level, all you have is like there's all these random percepts crossing your vision. It's like, okay, there's this thing, this thing, this thing. All you have at this point is like existence exists, right? You have just entities, but you're not identifying any of them. But then on the second level, you have like, you can recognize a particular thing as opposed to some other things, right? It's like, okay, this thing is distinct from those other things. So things have identity. They don't just exist. Things don't just exist. They exist with identity. But then beyond that, you have the conceptual level, where you abstract between all these different particular entities, and you go, oh, these things are similar. I'm going to mentally group them together. And that's how you get onto the conceptual level. And I think it's on the conceptual level that you can have emotions about things. I don't think there are emotions on the perceptual level. Because if it's, what would be an emotion on a perceptual level? That would be like, there's a percept which comes in, and I feel a certain way about it. But like,
okay,
I wouldn't have any ideas relating to this percept. So it would have to be automatic. Like, it would have to be based upon my physiology, the way I feel about it. It couldn't be based on like ideas I have, because I haven't abstracted any ideas yet.
Right. Yeah. So emotions are things like they're chosen responses to things in this like definitional framework. Okay, I can see where this is going, and I think to carry on the debate, I think I can work with these definitions. So when I say that people have emotional connection to the state, or like emotionally want things to happen to other people, I think what I mean there is that they have like a prior desire, like they have a sensation, like a disgust response, or a what would I say, involuntary or initial desire that people be controlled or in some respect.
Then the question is like, why don't all men have this, right? Why, if this is just a part of nature, of the nature of man, then why is it that like, because all men feel pain, right? But it's
That's
not all men
there are
like
some
this
people
thing.
who don't feel pain.
Sure, if you have like CPAP or whatever,
disorders.
like you have like a nerve disorder, right?
Yeah.
But like
Exactly.
like the standard man feels pain, right? But the standard man, I don't think, has the same psychology. Definitely not throughout history. Like different societies have had wildly different societies, which is born out of it. But like, if the society you get is just based on the nature of men, why would we expect trends like this? Why would we expect it that suddenly everyone coalesces together with a predisposition towards less state, and that suddenly everybody coalesces together with a predisposition towards more state, and like it just so happens to follow the exact trends of philosophy, which the philosophical theory of history would predict, right?
Well, it's like you say, people choose how to respond with their emotions based on their sensations, right? So someone might have the sensation that someone, they get a disgust sensation or reaction from someone, consuming marijuana, right? But they've determined we were talking maybe about a libertarian here who's gotten the idea now that, well, they have the emotion, they have the emotional response that's actually okay, right? So they have, their idea gives them an emotional response here, so that they don't want the state to get involved with this person, right? But I think the average person, right, they allow their sensations to what's the word I'm looking for? They rely primarily on their sensations for their ideas, right? So, like, person causes me disgust, dislike that person. State does thing I like the state. As that's the level of thinking we're on here.
Well, I think your ideas that you have will have to be fundamentally derived from sensations, but they can't be derived just from sensations, because you have to have some sort of process of integrating the percepts that you're getting. The percepts don't just automatically impress upon your mind certain ideas, right? You have to have some process, which we call reason, to integrate these things. So this is basically where the objectivist idea of free will actually comes in. So like you have a choice between whether to drift, whether to think, or whether to evade. So drift is basically you just let all these percepts wash over you and you're not doing any sort of active thinking about them at all. Then evading is when you have some sort of side constraint where you are actively disintegrating these ideas. You're actively choosing to draw false conclusions based upon these percepts you're getting in. And then thinking would be properly using reason, properly integrating this sense data. But then why would we expect the average person, based on your view, it would seem that the average person has this sensational requirement to evade, essentially. But if this was the case, if this was actually the case, then humanity would have died long ago, because you can't have, because reason is fundamentally the way that men survive. A man can't survive on evasion.
You make false decisions, you'll end up with incorrect outcomes, right? If you predict, when I harvest this wheat, I will have 100 tons, but you only have actually 3 grams. You'll die.
Would be even better to have no ideas about something than to have incorrect ideas about that thing. Because if you have bad data, then you're going to act upon that bad data, and that's like the worst outcome. So it couldn't be the case that men are predisposed towards evasion. They have to be able to choose evasion or choose thought.
Interesting framework. I just don't know. I don't know how that meshes with how I see men actually behaving, right? Like where, I guess people choose to evade in your mindset, and I think that maybe if I think about this I think people are predisposed to evade on different topics than other topics. For instance, it might not satisfy someone to evade on the topic of how much wheat am I going to harvest this year, because that is their end there is to harvest as much wheat as possible, right? Maybe not as much as possible, but their end there is to have wheat to eat, right? And so that means is have a correct understanding of what's happening here, right? So they're predisposed to actually think and get a correct outcome there. Whereas when a normal person is thinking about the state, for example, their end there isn't to have correct ideas. Their end there is to be emotionally satisfied with the existence of the state or something, and so or to satisfy their pre-existing ideas, right? So they will, instead of thinking about things and coming to a correct conclusion, they will instead think about things and come to a incorrect conclusion that satisfies them, right? The state exists and it is justified because it does things I like, or because it purges the infidels. And I think,
I think you're right in a sense, in that if you have been evading in the past, you essentially start building up this house of cards to where it's going to be real painful when you actually start facing reality. But I don't think this is sufficient to demonstrate why men would be evaders on particular subjects, because somehow the state had to come into being. So before there was even such a thing as a state, why would men be predisposed to evade when the state comes
Yeah.
along,
Well,
you know?
yeah. Well, I think it's because normal people derive satisfaction from knowing that, this goes back to like my tribalism, right? Like people like knowing that the people they don't like are getting hurt, right? That brings them satisfaction. And so that's what, like, I guess predisposes them to wanting to justify the state in their mind, right? So like they give you like the state is good. Um, and so whereas, and I guess I should account for like libertarians in this sense, where libertarians are people who are more concerned with truth, like they are satisfied by knowing the truth more than they are satisfied by, feeling that the people they don't like are getting hurt, right? um, Justified or not. So that's, a predisposition.
Well, I would say it's only the case that you would have satisfaction from knowing that, people you don't like are being hurt. That is only the case if you are evading, if you are disintegrating sense data. You'd actually derive satisfaction from freedom, from the opposite of this. If you were to think, if you were to be rational. So, like, how could this satisfaction from irrationality cause you to be irrational when you can also be satisfied, in fact, more satisfied, if you are rational?
Well, I don't know if people are satisfied with being rational. I could imagine someone who like comes across true facts, right? And
True facts is a funny word.
have to they true facts as opposed to false facts, illegal facts. And perhaps they realize that this is true, right? And then they become upset by this, right? This is an unhappy situation. Like, you can even think about this outside the realm of like ethics in the state. Like, you could discover that your family has been exploded by a NATO bomb while you were out getting cigarettes, and this is a true fact that you've discovered, and it would be rational for you to integrate this, but it is not exactly satisfying to discover this fact.
Sure, it's not good. Like, there are genuine motives which would cause a person, which would make a person want to evade. Like, there are people don't just randomly decide I'm going to be anti-rational today. It's they are anti-rational because they don't like reality, and they don't want to go through the effort of improving it. But it couldn't be the case that man is just by his nature that he necessarily is going to fall into this urge to evade. Or that we'd even have a constant urge to evade, right? Because if this was the case, then humanity would have never survived, right? So it has to be the case that men are capable of thinking. So, like, how could it be that there is this pervasive need to evade, on your view?
Well, I think my argument is a little more complex. That it's not that people need to evade on any topic in particular. It's that normal people, have a desire to evade on topics. Well, actually, it's not even just normal people. All people would have a desire to evade on a topic where they would have more satisfaction evading than they would thinking about it, right? And so then observing this, right, like, this is just kind of like praxeology, right? Like, people seek their most highly valued end, and if we apply this to like the end of thinking or evading or avoiding, right? If you gain more satisfaction from evading, then you're going to evade than if you gain from thinking, right? And observing this, now we apply this to like people in general, and then you observe that people have different desires, right? So some people desire, they gain more satisfaction from thinking and gaining truth above anything else, as opposed to some people who have more desire to evade. And on different topics, people might gain satisfaction by thinking versus different sections by evading. So you might have, like, for instance, like, you might have like a nuclear physicist, right? And he gets very good satisfaction from thinking about nuclear physics, right? Like getting correct information about this. But he's also like a neocon, and he gets significantly greater satisfaction from evading on the topic of like foreign intervention, or not thinking and getting incorrect conclusions on this, because it brings him greater satisfaction to know to think that sending in the military, blowing up this country is actually a good thing than it is a bad thing.
Well, I would say first, like, whether or not you are gaining greater satisfaction with thought or evasion, that has to be based upon prior thought or evasion, right? Like it doesn't
Yeah.
just come out of nowhere, because the satisfaction is like on the emotional level, so it has to do with your ideas, whether or not you've correctly integrated ideas or not. But
Yeah.
also, on this view, if people are going to choose to evade on topics where they have more, like, you could say physiological satisfaction from evading than thinking, but then why would anybody ever integrate any uncomfortable truth if this is so? If they didn't have a choice in the matter, if they were going to be choosing the evasion because it makes them feel nice.
That's an interesting question. I think it might be this. There's the I haven't really thought about this, but there's a few explanations I can think of onto my head. One might be that people integrate uncomfortable truths because they expect to have a greater satisfaction later. This is like a low time preference explanation. It's like, I'm going to integrate this uncomfortable truth because I expect that I will be satisfied by knowing this, later, like by having integrated this truth. The other thing might be that people don't actually integrate uncomfortable truths. They only think that they do, or they do in like they retrospectively realize this was uncomfortable to me, and now that I've integrated it, it is no longer uncomfortable to me. Or now that I'm here and about to integrate it, it is no longer uncomfortable, or something like that.
I would say
That's what I just came up with on top of
I would say like expecting greater satisfaction there, that is still going to be derived from previous thought or evasion, right? If they were truly consistent in their thought, then they would understand that they're always better off with thinking rather than evading, right?
Right, but normal people aren't consistent.
Right. But then what is the cause of that? Like, what causes them to be inconsistent? I'm saying that they have like a free choice in the matter, and their choice is going to be based upon definitely their previous choices, but also like the ideas they have based upon those previous choices, in fact. So it's the philosophy that they have. If you have a massive evasion philosophy where man can't know anything, man is useless, man is impotent, do anything, then you're going to be, like having this helpless feeling where it's like, well, why bother? I'm just going to join some group and, survive that way, because why bother? Because I'm useless, I'm helpless.
Right. Yeah, and I think you can see kind of this when you talk about like midwits. Like, I don't really think that I use the term normal people because I kind of, despite my cynicism on their like potential to become libertarians, I kind of have a respect for normal people. Like, I kind of they live their lives and carry on normally, but like the when you call like you go with like their midwits, so that they don't really come up with ideas of their own, they follow other people's ideas. I feel like that kind of has an impotence to it, whereas I'm kind of coming to the table where they have like an internal desire for satisfaction that leads them to untruthful conclusions that are satisfactory to them.
I could tell you my idea with midwits, and I actually got this understanding of what a midwit is from a guy called Edward Dutton on YouTube.
Okay.
So basically, like, a midwit, it's improper to think of a midwit as being somebody who is like actually just 100 IQ or something like that, who is like literally just on the middle of the IQ chart. It's somebody who's rather somewhat intelligent, but not that bright. They have like, they're intelligent enough to the point where
they're self-deceptive.
Yeah, they are intelligent enough to like, because the first point is that like when you have people who are genuinely like outlier intelligent, like really, really genius in some aspect, they're generally not very clever in other aspects. Like, they might be some hyper genius nuclear physicist, but they are really sucky when it comes to like social interaction and stuff. So like the midwit isn't of this outlier intelligence, so they are like they are quite intelligent when it comes to social stuff. So they understand that they want to be, successful in life, and they understand how to do this because they know how to socially interact well. And they know, because they're a little bit intelligent, that if they adopt the ideology of the day, then they're going to be able to better fit in with people, right? The outlier intelligent people, the geniuses, they don't really give a shit about any of that because they don't care about social interaction because they can't do
autism.
Yeah. But like, and because they are a little bit intelligent, they're, somewhat bright. They are actually able to deceive themselves. They are able to come up with good reasons why they should believe in the philosophy of the day, because they know implicitly that they're going to have good reasons to keep themselves on this philosophy. And,
right.
That's basically why they believe in certain things. But they didn't originate the philosophy of the day, of course, because they couldn't. Because they're just picking whatever the philosophy of the day is, and they're going with it, because that is going to net them the greatest social gains that they can get, and that's what they're after. But then, where did the philosophy of the day come from? It couldn't have come from them, because they were just copying what it is. Right? And the answer is, it comes from these outlier intelligence people. These people who don't give a shit what the philosophy of the day is. They're just going out for what they think is correct, and they're going to say it no matter what. Because, this is the thing with, someone like Immanuel Kant. He's very, very much demonized in objectivist circles. We all hate him because we think he's a massive evader. But he's definitely a genius. He was undeniably...
Immanuel can't shut up.
Yeah. He was undeniably one of the most genius philosophers ever. He had a huge system of philosophy. Very well thought out. Very beautifully,
head?
Yeah, the guy was definitely a genius. And that's how he was able to come up with some new philosophy. Right? He wouldn't have been able to do that if he was a midwit. Right? So it's the thinkers. It's the intellectuals. I shouldn't say thinkers, but it's the intellectuals. These outlier intelligence people who are coming up with new philosophies. And then it's promulgated by some slightly above midwit people. The university professors and stuff. But not so much anymore, because there's a lot of midwits in university now. But, the above midwit people, the lower intellectual class, you could say, they are promulgating this philosophy among people. And then eventually, the midwits catch on. It's oh shit, this is what everybody in my field is believing, so I've got to jump on this bandwagon.
Yeah, okay. All right, I see. So we're going, you have a formation of a meme, and a meme I mean idea, viral idea, and then it spreads to carriers, and then they spread it to the broader population. Okay, I feel like that's an interesting way of formulating this, and I think that's actually a fairly accurate way of formulating how ideas come to be. You have big thinkers, and then big philosophers who then spread it to their circle, who spread it out to people. But I think you also have to consider that goes back to, predisposition of it. The reason people pick up ideas isn't purely based on how convincing the speaker is or the merit of the ideas. It's also how satisfactory the idea is to them. And this might be based on prior ideas they already have. If you're already I don't know, well, if you're a minarchist, you might be predisposed to accept anarchist ideas eventually, right? What's the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist? 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
So, that's big. But if you were to try and give anarchist ideas to, I don't know, a neocon, their ideas are so antithetical is that they're not going to accept this at all.
I would say they might accept it if they are a genuine thinker. This is something, I can bring in some anecdotal evidence here, I suppose. You got to, so I get to now. The way I came into anarcho-capitalism was because, Idle came in and he was like, no, you're wrong about this shit. And he just kept beating me over the head with it. And then eventually I was like, yeah, no, he is right. And I just couldn't, because I was honest in my mistakes. I was in honest error. I wasn't dishonest with it. I had to come to the correct conclusions when they were demonstrated to me.
Right.
And I could not imagine
prejudice.
Yeah, I could not imagine ever not being an ANCAP now. It's just outside my wheelhouse. Every other ideology I've had. The second I became to ANCAP, everything just became suddenly clear to me. And I see this in talking to other ANCAPs. It's how did you, they mirror this sort of when I finally came to that conclusion, it was a light switch flipped. Like, I've never had that in any other journey to any other political ideology I've ever had. Like, you know, I've gone through the compass, like from like lib left to lib right, and then down to ANCAP. Like, you know, like I was initially like just standard statist Scottish person, you know, like socialist. But then I found John Stossel's videos, and I was like, you know, he's actually kind of telling the truth here. And then I was very quickly shuttled off to ANCAP because, like, I wasn't, I suppose, socially intelligent enough to reject these ideas. Like, I suppose I was just too autistic, right?
Yeah. I mean, what happened, like, that's actually very similar to my story. Like, I started, like, you know, lib left, you know, like, redistribute wealth to poor people because it'll help them, supposedly, right? Because it's just like you know, I feel like that was my initial setting. It's like, I see on the television, poor people are hurting and they need to be not poor to not hurt. And I'm like, okay, that sounds plausible. And then as I think about things, like, wait, we can't exactly just generate resources from nothingness. And, you know, and then I see videos on the internet and like capitalism, you know, like how it increases standards of living, and that moves me to the right, etc. Similar story for me. What I think, the thing is, I still remember kind of what it's like to be a statist, or like how to think like a socialist, I feel, because it's all you have to do is just, it's kind of like putting yourself in some of the shoes, right? It's an empathetic exercise. You have to sort of imagine that you're lacking some of the available evidence and facts you have, right? That you don't understand certain things, and then what would satisfy you as like as a person who doesn't know these things in behaving this certain way? I think part of why I can do this is like what drives me to do this is that I'm a story writer, and like I take the role of characters, and you know, some of these characters are socialists, so I have to think about, well, how does a socialist think, or how does a neocon think? And my realization is, well, they don't come up with these ideas because they're like malicious or anything. They're not trying to be bad. It's that they're deceived, and they are emotionally satisfied by these ideas, right? Just like we're emotionally satisfied by truthful ideas, they kind of think these ideas are truthful, and they come to these conclusions because, you know, they think this is the right one, or maybe not even then. Maybe they think this satisfies my prior conclusions, right? For instance, like, it's okay to use violence against people who, let's think about a category of person. People who smoke marijuana, right? It's okay to use violence against people, and then, you know, then they come into the drug world.
Good
like,
job
well,
not
the drug war is a good
it.
thing.
That could have been clipped bad if it was, you know. But yeah, I would fundamentally agree. Yeah, I would fundamentally agree that these socialists and stuff, they think they're doing right, and like, I'm having a debate the next week or something related to this. Basically, like, a lot of these conclusions, these like socialist conclusions, these like statist conclusions, it's fundamentally derived from altruism. Basically, it's that, you know, you'll talk to an altruist. It's like, well, there's actually a book by one of the Supreme Court justices, which like sums this up quite well, where it's it was a book for children telling them how they should be moral, and it was saying you should find your favorite shirt and give it up, right? Your favorite shirt, you should get it and give it to someone else. And, you know, the initial response might be, well, so because it's apparently greedy to keep your favorite shirt. And it's like, well, why would it be greedy for you to keep it, but not for the person who gets it to keep it, right? But then, like, you know, the altruists don't just look at this and say, oh, no, you've caught us in a inconsistency here. We're pack it up, boys. Altruism is over, you know.
Oh.
Fundamentally what it is that it's because it's your favorite shirt. It's your value. It's something that you have worked to gain, something that you have worked to produce. That's why you don't deserve it. It's because those other people that you're going to give it to, it's because they didn't work to get it. It's because they didn't work to achieve that value. That's why they deserve it. So it's, altruism is very well summed up in the Marxist phrase, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. It's from those
take
people.
People who make stuff,
Yeah,
and give it people to consume stuff. The
Yeah.
whole, very small.
and this fundamental, like, you have like what's his name, like Peter Singer, I think it is, where he thinks that basically everybody is immoral. Everybody you know is immoral because they haven't given all their possessions away to like starving Africans or whatever.
People who need it.
Yeah, and like you read through his argument, and like it's very difficult to find which premise of his argument is incorrect. The answer is that it's the altruist premise, that if you've produced something, you don't deserve it. He doesn't say it in those exact words, but it's based upon that. That is the evil from which all of these evils spawn.
I think his premise is more, it's not that if you produce something you don't deserve it, it's that someone else deserves things that you have, right? It's that, and that implies that you don't deserve the things you don't have. That you don't deserve the things that you produce. The implication is by that.
I can actually,
someone else deserves it.
I've actually got the actual syllogism up here. So, if it is in our power to prevent something very bad from happening, without thereby sacrificing anything of moral significance, then we must morally do it. Premise 2. Hunger, disease, and other sources of suffering, disability, and death are very bad. Premise 3. The luxuries on which we spend money are not of moral significance. That's one I disagree with. And then premise 4. By donating money to relief agencies like Oxfam, we could prevent hunger, disease, and other sources of suffering, disability, and death. It's the premise 3. That the luxuries we spend money on, that these things which we like, our favorite shirt, are not of moral significance, that you don't deserve these things, that money should go to other people. That is the fault of his argument. And, the altruists have been scratching their heads, trying to find issue with his argument, and they all fail because they're all altruists.
Interesting, yeah. Okay, yeah. To bring this back to the debate a bit, though.
Yeah, we've been going on tangent after tangent. This is a libertarian strategy debate, by the way, guys.
Tangents are fun, all right? It's tangents are autistic. It's truth-seeking behavior. Okay, listen. You gotta establish some premises. Maybe we could bring this close to libertarian strategy. I mean, when I opened this up, I was going with no strategy, basically, like libertarian black pill. But what strategy do you think is fitting? You mentioned that you need to convince the intellectuals, because then you'll be able to convince the masses. But don't the intellectuals and the philosophers have their own sort of goals and predispositions to what sort of philosophies they want to make?
Well, whether they have goals or not isn't, like midwits, who have infected the intellectual profession, you could say. Yeah, they're irrelevant. They've sort of muddied the waters, but like genuine intellectuals, like people who are genuinely looking for truth and stuff, you have to be promulgating these ideas to them. So basically what this is you should be doing Isaiah's job. So this is from an essay by Albert J. Nock, where he talks about a story from the Bible of Isaiah. So Isaiah goes out every day and he says to the people, he says God's message to the people. And most people boo and laugh at him and call him an idiot. And, then he keeps going out every single day and he keeps saying God's message. Eventually, one person in the audience starts nodding along, going like, you know what, I'm kind of with this message. Everybody else is like booing and laughing and saying, nah, these guys are wrong. But eventually he gets up a small congregation of people, a tiny portion of the population, but still some people who have heard God's message and agreed with it. And then, because God tells him that when the end times come, only the people who agree with his message are going to survive. So all these people who are laughing and sneering at Isaiah, they all die. But the few people who he saves, they are alive and they can start the world anew. That's basically Isaiah's job. The libertarian or any sort of political strategist, they should be going out and doing Isaiah's job. They should be going out and just saying the message to a room full of people. 99 out of 100 of those people are laughing at you. They are thinking you're insane. They're not listening to you. But that one person in the room, he's going, yeah, I kind of agree with this. And then he goes out and starts doing Isaiah's job. He starts preaching the message to people. Most people laugh at him. Most people don't care. But a couple do. you know.
Right.
And once you collect enough
Yeah.
of this vanguard, they're called in Leninist terms, then eventually, like, society just goes in that way.
The mid echelon.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that's actually something I've thought about a bit. Like, is sort of vanguard theory, or like having a communist vanguard, like Leninist style. We have a libertarian vanguard instead. I wonder how effective that is based on like different ideas. I wonder if like if you could apply that to any idea, or if there's something uniquely what's the word attractive about authoritarian ideas in terms of vanguard theory, where you have like your leader class, your vanguard, and then your followers.
Well,
Whereas in
let's think about it in terms of the abolitionist movement. Like, the abolitionist movement was definitely libertarian, right? It was very successful
yep.
as well. Same with the American Revolution. Definitely libertarian, definitely very successful. So you know, these,
Yeah.
they maybe didn't have an explicit vanguardist idea behind them, but like, you know, these,
Right.
we can abstract out and we can see that these ideas, they can succeed. And the fundamental point
Yeah.
is that it's the ideas which have to be promulgated. The pen is mightier than
Although
the sword.
I think if we examine both of these movements in their like broader goals and their ultimate fate, we can see that they both like didn't fully succeed. Like the abolition movement, they did succeed in abolishing chattel slavery. But if you also you read like Sanders Spooner and all of his contemporaries, they had much bigger ambitions in terms of abolishing the state, anarchism, which they never got around to. And then the same is true like for the American revolutionaries. Maybe they didn't have abolishing the state in mind, but they did have minarchism in mind. And what they got absolutely wasn't minarchism; it was statism, right? And then, well, like full-throated statism, which you know.
I would say, like,
So I think,
these
yeah,
ideas still live on, though. Like, these movements didn't die necessarily. Like, you know, Murray Rothbard, he came in and he revived a lot of these movements. Like, and it
it's
started
true.
off with like 18 people in Murray Rothbard's living room, meeting every week or whatever. And now we have like millions
Yeah,
of libertarians. Like, you know, we're doing pretty well
yeah.
for
Now we're
ourselves.
talking. Yeah, yeah. We talk about like the success. So the libertarian movement has been growing, in like recent years, and I think that actually has more to do with like a collapse of trust in the present elite class than it has to do with an actual shift towards libertarian ideas and beliefs, right? It's less that like the midwits are being convinced by our vanguard or like are following like the the ideas or something like that, and more that they have lost faith in the present intellectual vanguard, right? Like they see on CNN, they see Dr. Fauci, he's like, wear your mask, don't go outside, and then they look out that window, things are on fire, like I don't know if I like this message, so they seek out a different message. But that has less to do with them actually like being
Well,
committed to libertarianism,
I
or
don't think that
they,
works
yeah.
because we
And
have
the
the.
other thing,
Oh, sorry, I'll let you
go.
finish. Okay, all right.
Well, okay, yeah, who's gonna finish first? I'll finish quickly.
Okay.
The other thing I want to say is that I think the growth in left wing and right wing populism is significantly greater than it is in like libertarianism. Like you have like right wing status like Christian nationalists, national conservatives, the Trump movement, etc. That is much larger than the libertarian movement precisely because it plays towards people's tribal, desire to like see the people you don't like get hurt.
Mhm.
Whereas libertarians are like, actually, we shouldn't hurt other people. You should not hurt them. Leave them alone.
Well, I would say maybe as like because I'm gonna have to go to the toilet after this point. But like Casimir was saying that he had a question, so I suppose we could do like a Q&A type of deal after this.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
We could like go into like my Discord general or something.
Oh yeah, that'd be interesting. Yeah.
All right. So I would say, just as a last note, it can't be that people are just, they lose faith in these like horrible regimes who are totally irrational and totally inconsistent. Because I mean, the medieval regimes, they went on for fucking centuries. They had these irrational regimes for fucking ages. How long has the US been around? Like 200 years? That's not very long.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it at that, and I'll see you in the my general chat when I get back.
All right. All right. All right.
All right. See ya.
See you.
You left the Discord when I can rejoin. Let's see here. Copy link. Oop. There's Discord if you want to ask a question. How was that general? There we go. Alright, I'm here. I sent the link into the chat, so I guess we'll kind of wait like a little bit, and if nobody fucking joins, then we just call off.
Well, then we have no questions. Sadly.
Yeah. Casimir had a question, but he left the Discord. I mean, Casimir, do you want to just like restate your question or something in the text chat?
Yeah, let's see what it was.
Oh no, it says member joined.
What it was? Hang on, let's see. Question 5, Karnak. Is this not trained by doing sports and watching the behavior of parents? I don't know the context of what I was saying when he asked that question.
Well, apparently he joined the server, so I guess we'll see.
I can guess, though. Oh, okay, yeah. Got a Casimir cameo. There's Casimir. Here he is. I hear you if you're speaking. Oh,
If you can pull it up.
you are.
Okay, sure. A lot of things.
Jesus Christ, this like VC is laggy as hell.
That's fine. Maybe.
Well, I'll ask. I'll just off the top of my head. I don't know if you guys spoke about when you spoke about what makes statists. Are you considering the fact that since World War One, and since probably public education, the education of history has been, somebody said in chat, written by the victors list.
Written by the statists.
Yes. So is that not enough to like make people say this because they simply don't know? Like they have a. I mean, it even seeps into your own language, and this is like the. If you look at medieval times and you speak about it, or the Dark Ages, none of that is really true, right? Like the Wild West wasn't wild, dark medieval times weren't dark.
Yeah, so I think that is a contributing factor that the education system is statist, right? It's oriented towards creating conformity and creating good little statists, good little citizens of the regime, right? But I think that's sort of a self-reinforced expression of underlying desires for like authoritarian control on the part of the people being controlled, right? Like people could have just not gone to public education, right? Or what if they had a war but no one showed up? It has to do with people being indifferent or even like positively inclined towards the regimes that they behave in the way that's like authoritarian, like statist. Now, is public education a like non-effect? No, it's definitely beneficial to like statist ideas that people get into public education and are indoctrinated, but I don't think it's like the what's the word? Initial factor.
Sure. I would say though that I don't need it as an initial factor, but when I try to reconcile Liquid Zulu's conception that these ideas, so like Schadenfreude, the idea of enjoying another person's suffering, there might be some evolutionary advantage to it, and there might be some propensity to it, but also it might be entirely learned behavior. So like you observe your father watching sports and you're enjoying when your team is winning, but why are you hating when where's the hate expressed of the other team? Maybe you observe like hateful behavior towards yourself because of your team or something.
That's interesting. I think that's a natural expression of existing human behaviors. Like humans like to be tribal, and so sports is an expression of that, rather than, because I think you can see before sports exist, people express tribalism in different ways. Nationalism, obviously, like that's your first tribalism. Not my first tribalism. It's a different expression that still exists today. You have, but obviously, very early humans existed in literal tribes, which were conflicting with each other. So I think this is a natural, like, in-group, out-group human sort of behavior to categorize people like that and compete that way.
Well, we had a period during medieval times of like immense universalization within the European continent before the idea of nationalism emerged. So you had stories of, the universalization was under Christianity, and there was great animosity between Christian tribes. But let's say you were a Catholic in France, and you're a serf, and your town is hungry for some reason, and your lord is awful. You're about to die. Well, one of the things you could do is, if you're not if you're not enforced on the land, you could have traveled. You could have ended up in, a completely different country and be relatively accepted there.
That's interesting. I don't know much about the medieval period, to be honest, so I can't contest that. What I can say is that tribalism is much easier when you don't see the other person, right? So something I described earlier is that most people don't actually enjoy participating in violence or even observing violence. So if you look at the Milgram experiments, right, people get emotionally distressed when they follow the orders of the instructor, but they feel like they have an obligation to follow the orders of the instructor to electrocute this person, or to supposedly electrocute them. They don't actually, but they feel the stress, but they do it anyway, right? But so what I say is, when you're actually confronted with a person in front of you, it's much harder to suppress the cognitive dissonance of like being tribalist, statist sort of thing.
Wait. So on that experiment, were there any non-publicly educated people in that cohort?
No.
So how do we know anything about that experiment? If they passed through the industrial line of public education, where they're severely punished in the most influential years of childhood, by the way, they're influenced to like not oppose the teacher, not ask questions, follow orders. Bell rings, you get up. Bell rings, you sit down. And then we go and we say, "Oh, we'll have an unbiased experiment with such people."
That's fair enough. I think you're right that there's probably a significant level of influence there based on the public education. Although I think we can infer that if you like remove public education, you would have like a what's the word? You would have a reduced compliance there, right? I still think you would have significant levels of compliance. That's just intuition, though. I can't really back that.
I think the reason why we have public education is basically an arm of this dependence altruist philosophy, right? So it's caused by the philosophy and it promulgates that philosophy. So I don't think you, I don't think you have, like, the reason you'd still have this dependence without the public education, but like the public education derives from the dependence, right? It's not like the fundamental part.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I think public education probably derives from before like dependence. It was more like you had your elites and like oppressions who were like, we want to turn normal people into good citizens, and then did exactly that. It was very successful. That's interesting to think about.
Well, here's a counterexample. So if we look at there are groups that don't participate in public education. So that's the documentary I keep shilling about the dinner with the Amish, the Mennonites. They say things like, "Listen, we're the interviewer asked them, what's your weakness?" And they say, "Our weakness is our incredible individualism." Why are they answering that? because their religion, their traditions tell them to constantly cooperate together, but they're expressing a natural propensity for individualist, self-responsible action. And so their altruism, quote unquote, actually, it's not self-sacrificial in that sense, and it exists in a great tension with their desire for self-sufficiency. So they have to make a considerable effort to do things like recognize the desires of others. They're positively working on it. Why did they have to work so hard for something that most people achieve sort of on autopilot, supposedly? Maybe because it's not natural, but it is like cultural survival, whereas naturally they're very much individualistic.
That's an interesting thing to think about. Yeah, I don't know much to comment on that. That's a very significant counterexample. I don't encounter any like individualistic or stateless populations in my life. Like everyone I know is going through Australian public education, and you gotta imagine like what that's like. It's you don't even have like the American like background of paying lip service to freedom and liberty. It's literally like no queen and country, crown. Well, I guess king and country now. And it's very
Not for long.
Oh no, he has a plan.
I wonder if I'm being inaccurate though. I don't think that they're. So our conception is of an individualist as somebody like a Stirner, right?
Oh yeah, I don't buy that. Like I think so. Whenever people talk about individualism, I feel like it's important to distinguish like atomistic individualism and like molecular individualism, where you have like atomistic is like I am the important one. I'm the I only work for me. Other people, screw them. I don't care. They're gone. They're dead to me, or they are my property. Stunners. But like molecular individualism is like recognition of like everyone's individuality, right? Like everyone's an individual, first of all, and everyone has rights. This is like a libertarian kind of individualism, but also, well, as individuals, we have so much to gain by working together. Molecularly. Yes. That's kind of the analogy there, but not. It's not a collectivist like we are one body together. No, it's we're satisfying our own individual interests by working together as a group. I think that's like a superior account of individualism than like atomism, which you only get from like Stirner and like egoists and such.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and I think that's what makes them like a distinction. So these are groups that are highly collaborative, and they voluntarily pay for each other's emergency expenses. In essence, they don't even need an insurance.
Yeah, so, and I think that's what people might traditionally call altruism, is like helping other people. And I think Zulu's definition of altruism has more to do with like what's the word?
Self-sacrifice.
Yeah, self-sacrifice, devaluing your own ends, whereas what you've described is a little more like treating other people as your ends, right? Like other people's well-being is one of your ends, and that's not altruism the way Zulu describes it, but it is like being nice to other people.
I would say I think the difference is between them. One is like a rational egoism, where you understand that other people are useful, that you understand the division of labor, that you understand that to achieve the best life for yourself, you should be cooperating with others. The other is an irrational egoism, which is like the Stirnerite conception of egoism, where fuck everybody else, who cares? I'm just going to be a complete hedonist, which is destructive of your own life, in fact, and fuck everybody else. Like that's irrational egoism.
Yeah, that's like individualism and egoism. But like when we're talking about altruism, like there's like I feel like there's a distinction between like the colloquial understanding of like being nice to other people and like your definition, where it's like you value other people's ends above your own, and like I
don't think that is distinct from the colloquial understanding. I think the colloquial understanding, fundamentally, when you drive it down to its premises, when you break it down, that is what it depends upon. Like, I don't think I'm changing the fundamentals there.
Yeah, I think. Well, I think I'm not sure. I don't think most people don't talk about altruism like in a regular conversation. So like when you think about colloquials, it's like, well, it's a almost purely philosophical term in the first place. But when I see altruism represented in like a game, right? It has more to do with like being nice to a different person than it has to do with like you don't deserve the things you have. But you're right. Like so, yeah, you're right.
I know.
One example I observed recently has been, it's possibly a fake example, but like a group of people in a survival situation has sort of a last a certain period of time competition. And they did have a sense of like they were going to cooperate and say share food, but also a very intense sense that I should be the one who provides the food, to the point where people feel lightly insulted when someone else would help them if that help would be unnecessary. Like they would feel that to be a diminishment. Whereas you would expect, a complete collectivist to actually not care whether they're the provider or like who, it might even be unoptimal as a behavior. But why is it optimal? Oh, because it provides a drive to persevere, where a collective mentality might just expect someone else to pull through.
Yeah, like it's when Zulu talks about the Marx like motto, like from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, right? That sounds good until you think about the incentives. Like it sounds good only if you're a collectivist, because well, clearly the people who make stuff, they make a lot of stuff, and then the people who need stuff, they get the stuff they need. That sounds perfectly fine. But then you think about incentives, like okay, so the people who make stuff, they don't get the stuff that they make, right? They only produce, right? And the people who need stuff get more stuff, right? So if you behave as though you need more stuff, you get more stuff. So that just incentivizes, consumption and disincentivizes production. And then you think about what's the opposite of that, like from each according to his need to each according to his ability, right? Which instead incentivizes production, right? You make more stuff and incentivizes people to be more efficient with their consumption, right? Because if you need to consume more will be like extracted from you, right? As a price for your need to consume. And that's like the opposite of the Marxist ethic.
I don't think it is fundamentally a problem of incentives. I think the problem is fundamentally that it is not immoral for those who produce to reap the rewards of their production. I think that's good that they do this. I think it's good that people reap the rewards of what they have worked to achieve. I think that's a fundamentally good thing. And it's a fundamentally bad thing to take from those who produce towards those who didn't produce. Not because this has a bad incentive structure, but because this is just inherently a bad thing to do, and therefore will lead to bad results.
Well, yeah, obviously, if you're coercing, like that's theft, right?
Even without coercion, even if you were to do this completely consensually, I think it's just wrong. I think it's a bad thing to do.
Yeah, that makes sense, because thinking about the outside of the incentive structure, what you're doing essentially is what the implication of that is that production is not good and consumption is good, and that's what are the implications?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
starve.
You have death on this idea. Like this is fundamentally why you'll see objectivists always calling every other philosophy a death philosophy, is because on all these views, you have death, you have anti-life, no matter what. Like, because you are rejecting reason, and reason is fundamentally what is keeping man alive. You're rejecting production, and production is required for life. You are rejecting these things which are required for men to live and to live well. Like, so you're against life.
You point at the neocon and you're the anti-life ethic, and they just disintegrate.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea with my anti-primitivism videos, is I call them apocalyptic, which they are, because if you really think about it, What is apocalypse? It's a massive breakdown in the capital structure, the structure of production, right? That's what an apocalypse is. And primitivists are directly advocating this. Even the communists don't directly advocate this. The communists their results will indirectly result in a destruction of the capital structure, but they don't directly advocate that. They think they have all these excuses. They think that they can actually have a bigger capital structure. They think they could even be better than the market. They don't directly advocate these horrible, horrible apocalypse, which the primitivists do, and that's why I hate primitivists probably more than any other political ideology.
Yeah, because primitivism is like just straight down to the point of like it skips any of like the ethical excuses like, oh no, you're stealing from the workers. No, it's like, no, actually you should struggle in the wilderness for your entire life and die.
It's like the most blatant death
like something
philosophy.
Evil.
Apart from like early philosophies of like asceticism and like, you know, which derive from Platonism, like, you know, the early ascetics would be like essentially suicidal without actually killing themselves. They're as close to suicidal as you can get without killing yourself. Like, they would drink dishwater, they would sleep on rocks, they would like, you know, they would just horribly torture themselves, like these ascetic monks, because they hated living on Earth, because they thought Earth was fake. They thought everything they saw was fake, and that they have to escape Earth and get to the real world, up in heaven.
It's the flat Earth philosophy.
It's basically like was what early Christianity was, until Thomas Aquinas comes along, and this is why if I had to pick a Christian, if I had to pick some religion to be, I would definitely pick Catholicism, because at least then you have Thomas Aquinas, right? Thomas Aquinas is one of the greatest philosophers ever, because you have this pro-life philosophy with Thomas Aquinas. You have some sort of, like, you know, irrationalism in him because he's still religious, but he's far, far, far better than what came before. Like, he is one of the greatest heroes of history.
Trying to inject rationality into the Christians.
Yeah, and he did so successfully. Like, he successfully brought
of the idea that it didn't exist prior.
Sorry?
I'm skeptical of this idea that like sort of that what was prior was more Gnostic and that he changed it. I think I would want to like talk to the Orthodox at least claim, I haven't verified those claims, but they claim to have always been primarily Aristotelian.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any insight onto Christian history here. So
I mean, I know for a fact like the Muslims were, so maybe the Orthodox are like derived from that sort of region or something. I don't know, but I know like in the relevant area in like West, it's from Aquinas. And the West is really the relevant area when we're talking about the history of philosophy.
Yeah, these are like various places, like parts of the Middle East after the Crusades. These were
they definitely had Aristotle. Like that's where Aquinas got it from. Like I don't want to knock like people in the Middle East or anything. Like they preserved Aristotle for centuries, and they were able to bring it over, and the scholastics tried to integrate it, and the Thomas Aquinas was the successful scholastic.
We can pull something from chat.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. I don't know if I'm fully libertarian black-pilled, especially after this conversation. But I think that there's serious cause for skepticism and concern that the libertarian movement is even really progressing towards a successful end here. I know, like, we're supposedly growing in population and numbers, right? But I still think there's a lot of people who just would never buy it or would never want to live in a stateless society because they are dependent, supposedly.
Well, one of the things is that we don't tend to satisfy their demands, and you guys said that their demand was what's then, but the real word I would use for it is their demand is order, and for an obvious reason, they believe that order only comes out of centralized control by an elected or anointed authority, and that they don't believe that such an authority can emerge voluntarily, whereas most ANCAPs readily accept such voluntarily arising authorities. And to that, to make you more optimistic, just think about why it's a problem now. Think about what the United States was prior to 1913. Just one of the most libertarian and the most rapidly growing economically societies in human history, also happened to be dominated largely by Protestant Christians, and the main figures of industry were super individualistic to perhaps even a fault, on the cultural, with tinges of cultural Darwinism even, but individuals that built their own empires from scratch, people like Vanderbilt, Rockefeller. And did they believe that the government will provide for them, or that they need the government? No, they considered the government their primary enemy, and they defeated it multiple times in multiple battles, and then were eventually coerced by the force of the government to tone it down a notch, right? And basically by their opponents. And so if you have that rich history, and this is something we're currently rediscovering through proper internet historians, why would we not be optimistic? Clearly, it was a much higher state of freedom was possible in the past.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I would add on to that. I shared the NBC documentary on the Free State Project. So we are also in modern days having real victories. It's we've had those victories in the past. We've had this libertarianism in the past, and we're currently pushing towards it in the present. Some big victories.
The FSP is probably the one thing that I see in reality which gives me any kind of hope that things might actually happen, because the FSP's strategy is specifically not contradictory to what I'm saying. It circumvents a lot of what I say, because instead of working to convince normal people or change people's ways, it's congregating people who are already convinced in a location. And I think that's, like I said in the beginning of the debate, that the formation of a libertarian social order is impossible because normal people would never accept it. Well, there's a caveat to that where what if you just didn't have quote unquote normal people or non-libertarians around? Well, then you would have a libertarian social order by definition.
We have Paladin here. Do you want to ask anything? By the way, we're live, Paladin, in case you didn't see the notice.
What's a Paladin?
Paladin, he's joined the call.
I know, it's a reference.
You have anything to say?
If he doesn't, I had a thought that might be relevant. If you look at why certain...
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, there we go.
Yes.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah.
Skip over me.
Yeah. For some reason, my audio input doesn't work when I have my earbuds in. But anyway, so since you brought up the Free State Project, I had a question that concerns that and libertarian strategy more broadly. So Porkfest is coming up in about 2 weeks. And for those who don't know, it's an annual gathering in New Hampshire. The Libertarians, Free State Project.
And you'll be there at this exact stall. Doxes you.
Yeah.
My God.
And this year, there are two prominent guests that are going to be at Porkfest, Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The former was a presidential candidate in 2020. The latter is a presidential candidate this year. Both Democrats. RFK is the candidate for the Democratic Party. So, and this, though this has been divisive, I'm in the FSB chat. And this has been divisive among libertarians. Like, should these people be at Pork Fest? Is it a good idea? Because
Inviting these statists into our home, discuss.
Well, so I guess my general question is having Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, is reaching out to these certainly relatively more liberty-minded than their contemporaries in the Democratic Party or among states in general. Like, is this a good idea, or is it not? And personally, I don't think it's a good idea as far as strategy. But
I'll let Zulu go first.
I think it's fine because it gets like the word of the Free State Project out there. It's like, some big speaker, and then you have like people who are a fan of that person. It's like, oh, they're speaking at this pork fest thing. What the hell's that? So there's like some sort of a ham eating contest or whatever, and like oh no, it's actually about this Free State Project thing. So yeah, it gets the word out there. I think don't bend the knee to them, like, don't kowtow. But like, I think it's a generally good sign that these people want to speak and want to sort of acknowledge libertarianism as a genuine force. I think that's a pretty positive sign.
Yeah, I think strategic considerations here are obviously when RFK shows up at the Free State Project, that boosts their profile, as Sulu mentioned. The other thing to mention is I really wouldn't consider them to be like quote unquote more libertarian than like the typical Democrats. I think that they're better understood as being like anti-establishment, which I guess they're technically like, let's not blow up random foreigners, but that's not what am I going to say here? It's not exactly a high bar.
That's starting from a very low bar.
Yeah, and so that's, although one thing I would say is that's a decent. So the Dave Smith Libertarian Party position is like, we're okay to reach out for single issue coalitions, and ending the war, single issue coalition, that would be a good. That's their position. I'm sympathetic to that because I hope everyone here. I also dislike the random people are being exploded, and I think that would be a good thing for that to stop. Whether or not that's done by a libertarian party takeover of the United States somehow, or by the Tulsi Gabbard getting into office and deciding to stop the wars is irrelevant. And yeah, I think it can be a good thing. The bad thing, I don't really see significant negative effects to this. Like maybe a bunch of Democrats move to New Hampshire and thinking that they're going to join the Free State Project, but they don't have any libertarian convictions. But I really doubt that's going to happen.
Casimir, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question that's a bit of a curveball. Maybe it'll a new direction. I remember watching.
Well, I did want to respond, so if this is going into a new direction, maybe I should give my thoughts first.
Yeah, you're speaking. Go ahead.
Yeah. I hear all that, but I don't think it is a good idea for Tulsi Gabbard and RFK to be at Pork Fest. I mean, one, I think that both have a lot of good points, that they say a lot of things that are true and good, especially against the establishment, like being anti-war. And I think it's perfectly appropriate for libertarians to cheer on when they say these true things, because truth is what we should stand for. And if someone says something that's true, then regardless of what disagreements there exist, then we should stand next to them in proclaiming the truth or positions that are laudable. But as far as bringing them into our camp, figuratively and literally in this case, I think there is a great danger of right sectarianism, of diluting the libertarian movement, of diluting our principles. And that's, the common point I hear is that they're going to bring attention. they're going to bring attention to PorkFest, to the Free State Project. But what kind of attention? Like, and is that? Because I think the people that are likely to be attracted by Tulsi Gabbard or RFK going to PorkFest are people who are not dedicated libertarians, that are people more left of center. That I don't see Tulsi and RFK showing up reaching any kind of audience that will be pulled to the libertarian message, or more like that people being pulled to people who would dilute the message, like what would happen with the Tea Party. The Tea Party got in a big wave in 2010 that went all up, and the Tea Party, they were talking about, we need to rein in the deficit, we need to rein in the debt, we need to roll back government intrusion, and government being in bed with corporations, the 2008 bailouts, be against all of that. And the Tea Party, they swept. And then what happened? They got corrupted by the establishment. Establishment Republicans, they creeped into the Tea Party movement, they diluted it, and all of the gains were taken away. I mean, it came to naught. And I think that there is a risk of that happening here if we get too cozy with establishment statist types who happen to co-align with us on certain issues, but then to take that and say, oh, let's hee-haw in with them wholeheartedly, let's give them a platform, let's get behind them. I think we need to be careful. I think we need to mind our boundaries and just to preserve, the nexus of what it is we are doing, what our goals are, what we're striving for. Because the goals that Tulsi Gabbard have, the goals that RFK have, they are not all goals. They are not our allies. We have coalescing interests on some issues, and on that we can work together. But fundamentally, RFK, Tulsi, they're statists. They are with the Democratic Party. So
you're right.
That is a stark divide that we should not be blurring. And I fear that may be some blurring going on by having them at PorkFest.
I do have to leave soon. So what I will say is that I generally don't really have any faith in the political process anymore as any kind of means towards libertarian goals. I just think that the state, as it exists, has such all of its members, all the people inside the state, have such vested interest in furthering the goals of the state that it doesn't matter if you manage to elect like Tulsi Gabbard or Mario Rothbard's reanimated laser corpse of magic into the presidential office. It's like,
or even a Ron Paul.
You regenerate Ron Paul to be 55 years old, and he's give him like an uplink to like a satellite network, so that he's Giga Ron Paul. It doesn't matter if you get him into the presidential office, because everyone below him is a statist. And even if you replace all them, everyone below that is a statist. And how many employees does the federal plus state governments have in the United States? You'd have to replace all of these people, and it's not going to happen. You have to dissolve the organization at that point. And so when we're looking at the Free State Project, this has nothing to do with the political process, or maybe it has limited relationship to it. It has more to do with building your own parallel system, which evading the state, which I have much more faith in. My concerns are is that the state is going to see this and be like, okay, I'm going to step on you, just gone, vaporized, cast to the wind, like the Acadians, expelled. And
I would I suppose my response to Paladin's thing there would be that I definitely agree that there is a risk of right sectarianism, that you don't want to be diluting these principles. But I think you can still have these people on in these events without having this. Just don't endorse them. Just don't say this is the libertarian view. Which you see with DeSantis all the time. It's like, wow, DeSantis, he's the best. He's doing all these. He's great. We love DeSantis. We libertarians, we are for DeSantis. Don't do any of that shit.
Don't say that.
I think that's basically what I would
Well,
say on that.
I can connect the 2 points. So one of the ways in which libertarian-like thought seems to have emerged in history, or maybe just liberal thought in general, was through the topography of an area. So the topography, meaning like the actual map of the Aegean Sea, introduced certain behaviors that I believe allowed, city-states to become more free and more open towards trade and just an inflow of ideas in ancient Greece. Similar things happened in Venice and other merchant empires, and a very similar thing happened during the industrialization in Britain and in Amsterdam. A lot of these freer empires were empires built on trade, on shipping that cannot be controlled. So one of the dangers of the New Hampshire project is that it's like one free port, but it's like a concentration of everybody in one spot, more or less. Whereas the traditional way that liberal ideas survived, against authoritarians is by being able to just constantly relocate and not be tied out to a place.
Yeah, I think there's good prospects for that in like modern technology. Like people are a lot more mobile. Like everyone in New Hampshire has a motor vehicle. So if you see on the news that the federal government is now sending in their tanks to kill all the libertarians, like at worst, people can jump in their car and drive into Vermont or Canada, or we might have our Hoppy and physical removal services. They repurpose their helicopters for evacuation. We're all going to evacuate from New Hampshire. But I think that's not very likely. I think any kind of anti-free state effort that's not really on the table for the state at the moment, because at the moment it's just too small of an issue. But if it did become a larger issue, it would be at that point it would just be too really powerful to stop, because the federal government has to rely on local agents. That's kind of one of the thankful things that has happened. And if the free state is full of free staters, well, they can't rely on local agents. All the local agents are on the side of the free staters.
Yeah, and it was a very similar thing with the American Revolution. A very common pattern of the American Revolution was, you had these militias, these insurrectionists popping up in Massachusetts and everywhere else. And then, the king would say, hey, rural governors, like, tamp down on this. The rural governors would tell their enforcers, hey, tamp down on this. And the enforcer would say, well, we're not going to arrest our neighbors. No, screw you.
Lol, Lamau, no. Spears. Anyway, this is a very good conversation. I have to dip out now. Thank you for the debate, Zulu. That was interesting.
Yeah, that was a good debate. I suppose I'll end the live stream here then. I suppose I'm going to go for a smoke after this, but I'll come back into the VC if people want to still talk.
Man, going for a smoko. All right.
Yeah, I'm a real
very
objectivist.
anti-life behavior.
I'm an objectivist. What do you expect? Oh yeah, that's the